A cruel daughter-in-law forces her elderly mother-in-law to endure the scorching sun, holding a parasol to shield her while the daughter-in-law relaxes in a beach chair. The humiliation reaches its peak when the Sheik, the victim's son, returns and witnesses the scene, unleashing relentless vengeance. The scorching desert sun offered no respite. Fatima, the elderly mother-in-law, felt every bead of sweat trickle down her wrinkled brow, mingling with the silent tears that stubbornly welled up. Her arms trembled, aching muscles protesting against the weight of the parasol she held firmly over her daughter-in-law. Zara, oblivious to the suffering of others, lay stretched out in her luxurious beach chair, eyes shielded by designer sunglasses, a glass of iced juice in hand. "More to the left, Fatima," Zara murmured, without even opening her eyes. "The sun is hitting my ankle. Are you falling asleep standing up?" Fatima, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years of resentment, adjusted the parasol, feeling a sharp pang in her shoulder. The humiliation was a heavier burden than the sun itself. She gazed at the vast expanse of the mansion, the immaculate gardens, the shimmering pool, and felt a profound emptiness. Her son, Khalid the Sheik, was away on business, and in his absence, Zara felt like the absolute queen, wielding her power with cold, calculating cruelty. Suddenly, a distant sound broke the oppressive silence, a powerful engine unmistakable. Fatima felt a shiver. That sound. Zara, for her part, rolled her eyes. "It must be another one of your incompetent servants, Fatima. Tell them not to make so much noise." But the sound rapidly approached, and soon a black luxury SUV with tinted windows screeched to a halt at the mansion's entrance. Not far from where they were, the driver's door opened and a tall, imposing figure emerged. Fatima's heart leaped. Khalid. He stood there, under the same sun that punished her. His eyes, usually warm and full of life, were now fixed on the scene before him. His mother, bent and exhausted, holding a parasol to shield his wife, who relaxed in complete nonchalance. The expression on Khalid's face hardened, transforming into a mask of shock and then into a cold fury Fatima had never seen before. Zara, finally realizing the sound wasn't from a mere servant, took off her sunglasses and sat up, a forced smile beginning to form on her lips. "Khalid, my love, you're back early." She tried to rise gracefully, but her eyes met his, and the smile faltered. There was no warmth, no joy in her husband's gaze, only a dark intensity that made her recoil. Khalid didn't respond. He didn't take his eyes off his mother, who now looked at him with a mixture of relief and dread. He saw the sweat stains on her tunic, her skin reddened by the sun, the exhaustion in every fiber of her being. Then his gaze moved slowly to Zara, who was now fully standing, trying to appear innocent. "Mother," Khalid's voice was low, but imbued with an authority that made the air vibrate. "Go inside. Rest." Fatima didn't need a second invitation. Releasing the parasol, which fell to the sand with a soft thud, she hurried towards the house, not daring to look back. Zara, feeling the heavy silence, tried to break the tension. "Khalid, my love, what is it? Why the long face? Mother was just helping me with the parasol. She likes to be outdoors, you know." She laughed nervously, a hollow sound that echoed in the air. Khalid finally looked at her. His eyes were like two embers, devoid of any trace of affection. "She likes to be outdoors," he repeated, his voice dangerously calm. "Or does she like to be humiliated?" Zara paled. "Don't be ridiculous, Khalid. I would never do such a thing to your mother. She's my family." Khalid didn't respond. Instead, he turned his back on her and walked towards Zara's red sports car, which was parked a little further away, gleaming under the sun. It was an expensive gift he had given her for her birthday. "What are you doing?" Zara asked, confused. But a chill of apprehension already ran through her. Khalid opened the trunk of his own SUV. From it, he pulled out a heavy, long-handled sledgehammer. The sound of metal against the stone ground echoed through the silent mansion. Zara watched, horrified, as he approached her car. "Khalid, what are you doing? Stop that! It's my car!" But Khalid didn't stop. With a guttural cry that seemed to release all his pent-up fury, he raised the sledgehammer and brought it down with brutal force onto the sports car's hood. The metal groaned, crumpling with a deafening crash. The car alarm blared, adding a cacophony of sound to the scene. "No! Khalid, stop!" Zara screamed, running towards him, her eyes wide with dread and disbelief. "Have you gone mad? It's my car! You can't do this!" Khalid ignored her screams. He struck again, this time the windshield, which shattered into 1,000 pieces, falling like a rain of glass. The sound of destruction was deafening, each blow a hammer to Zara's soul. He continued, methodically, relentlessly, transforming the luxury car into a twisted pile of metal and glass. When the last blow resonated, leaving the car unrecognizable, Khalid dropped the sledgehammer. The alarm finally silenced, leaving a heavy, chilling silence. He turned to Zara, who stood a few feet away, her face pale, her eyes filled with tears of rage and despair. "This," Khalid said, his voice now a cold, deadly whisper, "is just the beginning, Zara." Zara stood there, paralyzed, the sound of the sledgehammer still echoing in her ears, the smell of burnt metal and rubber lingering in the air. Her eyes, once filled with rage, now widened with growing terror. The car, her precious red sports car, was an unrecognizable mass of twisted metal and shattered glass. Khalid's phrase, "It's just the beginning," pierced her mind like a cold blade. "What? What do you mean?" she stammered, her voice hoarse, almost inaudible. "Khalid, you can't do this. I'm your wife. You can't treat me like this." Khalid stared at her, his eyes dark and impenetrable. There wasn't a shred of emotion, love, or pity in them, only a cold, frightening determination. "You humiliated my mother, Zara, my own mother, under the scorching sun, while you reveled in the shade. You treated her like a servant, worse, like an object." His voice, though low, carried the weight of a mountain. "Do you think a car is sufficient punishment for that?" Zara tried to compose herself, her old arrogance struggling to emerge. "She was just helping me. She's elderly, she needs exercise. I was taking care of her, Khalid. You're being irrational." A bitter, humorless smile twisted Khalid's lips. "Taking care of her. You forced her to stand for hours, while her arms trembled. I saw it, Zara. I saw the sweat, the tears, the exhaustion, and I saw your cruel indifference." He took a step forward, and Zara instinctively recoiled. "You are no longer the queen of this house, Zara. Not while my mother is suffering under your roof." He turned, and with a firm gesture, called one of the guards who was already approaching, drawn by the noise. "Ahmed, call all the servants. Gather them in the main hall, and tell the cook to prepare a light meal for my mother and take it to her room immediately. No one is to disturb her." The guard nodded, hurrying to carry out the orders. Zara felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "What are you doing, Khalid? What are you going to do with the servants? They're mine." "They are family servants, Zara," Khalid corrected her, his voice cutting. "And from now on, they will answer directly to me, or to my mother." He approached her again, the distance between them dangerously narrowing. "You abused my trust, my absence, and my mother. Now, you will learn the meaning of respect." He took his phone from his pocket and made a quick call, speaking in Arabic with an authoritative voice. Zara didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. He was giving orders. When he hung up, he stared at her. "Your credit cards have been blocked, your bank accounts frozen. Access to any luxury I provided you, revoked." Shock paralyzed Zara. "No, you can't do this. I have nothing. How will I live?" "You will live as you deserve to live," Khalid replied without a hint of remorse. "Without the privileges you failed to value, without the power you used to oppress." He signaled to another approaching guard, "Take Mrs. Zara to the downstairs guest room, the one without a garden view, and make sure all her jewelry and designer clothes are removed from there. She will only have the essentials." Zara's legs gave way. "Guest room? Khalid, no. I'm your wife. This is my room, my home." Tears of despair welled up in her eyes, not from regret, but from dread at the loss of her status and comfort. "Your home." Khalid laughed, a dry, cruel sound. "This is my family's home, Zara, and you, with your actions, have proven yourself unworthy of being a part of it, at least not in the way you imagined." He looked at the guard. "Escort her, and make sure she has no access to any external means of communication. No one is to contact her, and she is not to contact anyone." The guard, a corpulent man with an impassive face, gestured for Zara to follow him. She hesitated, looking at Khalid with pleading eyes, but he merely averted his gaze, his decision unshakable. "Khalid, please," she pleaded, her voice choked. "I'm so sorry. I swear I'll never do it again. Give me another chance." But Khalid was already walking away, heading towards the mansion, without even a backward glance. Zara watched the door close, feeling abandoned, stripped of everything. The guard gently nudged her. With her body trembling and her soul in tatters, she found herself being dragged into a new and terrible reality, where power and luxury had evaporated like desert mirages. The sun, which once protected her, now seemed to mock her misfortune. Khalid's vengeance had only just begun, and Zara realized with a chill down her spine that she was completely at his mercy. Zara, tears streaming down her face, felt the guard's firm hand on her arm. It wasn't a violent touch, but undeniably authoritative. She turned one last time to the mansion, hoping Khalid would reappear, that it was all a nightmare, a cruel joke. But the door remained closed, a final seal on her sentence. The sun, which had once indirectly punished her through Fatima, now seemed to burn her own skin, exposing her shame to all the servants who, discreetly, watched the scene from afar. She could feel their gazes, their muffled whispers, the contained satisfaction of some who no doubt had witnessed her cruelties. The walk to the downstairs guest room, a place she barely recognized, felt like an eternity. Each step was a humiliation, a reminder of her downfall. Upon reaching the room, a functional space yet devoid of the ostentatious luxury she so loved, Zara saw two maids already waiting. Their faces were impassive, but their eyes registered every detail of the scene. "Remove everything that isn't essential," the guard instructed, his voice monotonous. Zara watched in mute shock as her jewels, carefully stored in velvet cases, were taken away. Her designer dresses, hanging on silk hangers, were stacked and carried off. Exotic leather bags, exorbitantly expensive shoes, everything disappeared, leaving behind only bare walls and basic furniture. She tried to protest, but the words caught in her throat. The reality was a punch to the gut. She was being stripped, not just of her possessions, but of her identity, of her power. Meanwhile, in the mansion's main hall, Khalid stood before all the servants, who had gathered in respectful silence. Fatima, already in the comfort of her room, was receiving the care she deserved. Khalid's voice was firm but controlled, echoing through the vast room. "As of today, there will be new rules in this house," he began, his eyes sweeping over each face. "My mother, Mrs. Fatima, is the matriarch of this family. She will be treated with the utmost respect and dignity. Anyone who disrespects her or neglects her needs will face severe consequences." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "Mrs. Zara will no longer have authority over you. All orders will come directly from me or my mother. Those caught disobeying this directive will be immediately dismissed. A murmur of approval, quickly stifled, ran through the room. Many there had witnessed Zara's cruelty and felt palpable relief. Furthermore, Khalid continued, Mrs. Zara is under my supervision. No one is to communicate with her without my express permission. No outside information is to reach her, and she is to have no access to any means of communication. He looked at Ahmed, the head guard. Ensure this is strictly enforced. Ahmed nodded, his expression serious. Later, Khalid went up to his mother's room. Fatima was sitting on the bed, wrapped in a soft robe, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. Her face was still tired, but the tension had eased. Seeing him, a faint smile appeared on her lips. "My son," she said, her voice still a little weak. Khalid knelt beside the bed, taking her hand and kissing it gently. "Mother, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I allowed this to happen." Tears welled up in Fatima's eyes. "It's not your fault, my son. I should have been stronger." "No," Khalid interrupted her, his voice choked. "It is my responsibility to protect you, and I failed. But I promise you, Mother, this will never happen again. Never again." He embraced her tenderly, feeling his mother's warmth, the fragility of her body. The pain she had endured was a wound in his own soul. That embrace was a silent oath that justice would be served and that his mother's peace would be restored, no matter the cost. Back in the guest room, Zara sat on the edge of the bed, which now felt hard and cold. The room was empty, stripped of any personal touch. The white walls seemed to close in on her. The windows, without a view of the lush garden, showed only a high wall. She was trapped. No phone, no jewelry, no designer clothes, no car, no power. She was a prisoner in her own home, stripped of everything that defined her existence. The silence was deafening, broken only by the accelerated beating of her own heart. The terror she had felt before now transformed into a cold, paralyzing despair. Khalid wasn't playing games. He wasn't the complacent husband she manipulated. He was the Sheik, and his fury was an unstoppable force. Night fell, and with it, the darkness of the room and the darkness of her uncertain future. Zara huddled, feeling the weight of her solitude and the bitter taste of her own ruin. The beginning of Khalid's punishment was more brutal than she could have ever imagined. Those caught disobeying this directive will be immediately dismissed. A murmur of approval, quickly stifled, ran through the room. "Ensure this is strictly enforced." Ahmed nodded, his expression serious. "Mother, I am so sorry. I am so sorry I allowed this to happen." Tears welled up in Fatima's eyes. "I should have been stronger." "No," Khalid interrupted her, his voice choked. "And I failed. She was trapped." The darkness of the room mirrored a growing emptiness within Zara. She huddled on the bed, the simple, rough fabric irritating her skin, accustomed to silks and Egyptian cottons. Every sound from the mansion, once muffled by the opulence of her master bedroom, now seemed amplified and distant. She heard the clinking of dishes in the kitchen, the hushed voices of the servants, the soft murmur of the wind outside, sounds of a life that continued, but without her. Her tears had dried, leaving a salty trail and a burning sensation. Despair transformed into a cold rage. How could Khalid do this to her? His wife, the mother of his children, though they were in distant boarding schools, a convenience for Zara. He was acting like a tyrant, a savage. The night dragged on, interminable. Zara tried to sleep, but her mind seethed with plans of escape, of vengeance. She imagined calling her lawyers, her family, the press, but then reality struck her again. No phone, no access, no power. She was a shadow, a prisoner in her own home. The Sheik wasn't just her husband, he was her jailer. When the first pale light of dawn filtered through the high window, revealing only the wall surrounding the property, Zara felt a shiver. There was no sun for her, only the promise of another day of confinement. She got up, feeling her body stiff. The mirror in the guest room was small and frameless, reflecting an image she barely recognized. Disheveled hair, swollen eyes, pale skin. The glamour had vanished. Shortly after, a discreet knock on the door. One of the guards opened a crack, and a maid entered, carrying a simple tray. There was no linen cloth, no fresh flowers, no fine porcelain she expected, just a plate of scrambled eggs, an Arabic bread, and a glass of water. The maid, a young woman Zara barely noticed before, avoided her gaze, placing the tray on the small bedside table. "Good morning, Mrs. Zara," the maid said, her voice monotonous without the usual tone of deference. "If you need anything, please inform the guard." Zara felt bile rise. "Where's my coffee? My fresh juice? And why is there no newspaper?" she demanded, her voice sounding weaker than expected. The maid merely nodded without responding and left, closing the door with a soft click that seemed to seal Zara's fate. Zara looked at the food. It was simple, almost Spartan. She, who always had a feast at her disposal, now received this, an insult. She pushed the tray away in anger, making the glass of water tremble. But hunger, a sensation she rarely experienced, began to gnaw at her stomach. She hesitated, then picked up a piece of the bread, chewing it without pleasure. Meanwhile, in the main wing, Khalid was in Fatima's room. His mother was sitting on the balcony, enjoying the gentle morning sun, a cup of mint tea in her hands. Her face was more relaxed, her eyes shining with a serenity Khalid hadn't seen in a long time. "Did you sleep well, Mother?" he asked, sitting in a nearby chair. Fatima smiled. "As I haven't slept in a long time, my son, peace has returned to this house." She looked at him, gratitude in her eyes. "You did what was right, Khalid. Don't blame yourself for taking so long. The important thing is that you acted." Khalid took her hand. "I should have realized sooner, but I promise I will ensure you never suffer again. And Zara—" He hesitated, his expression hardening. "She will learn the value of respect and humility. Her punishment has only just begun." Fatima squeezed her son's hand. "Divine justice is slow, but relentless, my son. And yours, it seems, will be too." Back in her confinement, Zara tried to open the window, but it was locked. She pounded on the door, shouting for attention. "Open this door! I want to speak to Khalid. I'm his wife." The guard outside responded, his voice expressionless. "Mrs. Zara is not permitted to leave the room without the Sheik's orders. No communication is allowed." "No communication is allowed," echoed in Zara's mind. It was the same rule she had imposed on Fatima. The irony was a bitter poison. She was being treated exactly as she had treated her mother-in-law. Despair returned, deeper this time. Khalid wasn't just punishing her, he was mirroring her own cruelty back to her, and she knew, with terrifying certainty, that this was just the beginning. The day had barely begun, and the solitude, the powerlessness, were already crushing her. His wife. "If you need anything, please inform the guard." Zara felt bile rise. "Where's my coffee? My fresh juice?" Zara looked at the food. An insult. Fatima smiled. "The important thing is that you acted." Khalid took her hand. "Her punishment has only just begun." Fatima squeezed her son's hand. "And yours, it seems, will be too." Back in her confinement, Zara tried to open the window, but it was locked. "Open this door! I'm his wife!" The guard outside responded, his voice expressionless. "No communication is allowed." The echo of her own words, "No communication is allowed," resonated in Zara's mind. Hours dragged on. Zara tried to read an old book she found on the dusty shelf in the room, but the words blurred in her mind. Rage and anxiety were constant companions. Around noon, the door opened again. This time, it wasn't the young maid, but one of the older, more imposing guards, accompanied by a middle-aged woman dressed in a simple uniform, whom Zara vaguely recognized as the head housekeeper, Aisha. "Mrs. Zara," the guard said, his voice grave and emotionless, "Sheik Khalid has new instructions for you." Zara lifted her chin, trying to regain some of her former dignity. "Instructions? I am his wife, not one of his servants." Aisha, the housekeeper, kept her gaze fixed on the floor, but a slight tremor in her lips betrayed a contained emotion. The guard ignored Zara's outburst. "You must come with us. The Sheik wishes for you to spend the afternoon in the garden." A flicker of hope ignited in Zara. Perhaps Khalid was regretting it. Perhaps it was a truce. In the garden? For what? To talk. The guard merely gestured towards the door. "You will see." Reluctantly, Zara followed them. With each step through the familiar corridors, the mansion seemed colder, more distant. She was led not to the pool area or the tea pavilion, but to an open stretch of the garden where the midday sun beat down fiercely. There, under a small, elegant awning, sat Fatima in a comfortable wicker chair, enjoying a glass of fresh juice. Beside her, on a small table, lay a book and a fan. The scene was one of peace and comfort. Zara's heart froze. She saw the empty beach chair, the same one where she used to lie. And then the guard handed her a simple parasol, made of plain fabric, without the embroidery or embellishments she so cherished. "You will stand here," the guard instructed, pointing to a spot a few meters from Fatima, but completely exposed to the sun. "And you will hold this parasol over Mrs. Fatima, ensuring she is always protected from the sun. Mrs. Fatima is to enjoy her afternoon in peace." Zara felt the air leave her lungs. It was a mirror, a torture. The same humiliation she had inflicted on her mother-in-law now returned to her with even greater cruelty. Blood boiled in her veins. "No, I won't do it. I am Zara, the Sheik's wife. You can't force me," she screamed, her voice choked with fury and shock. The guard merely looked at her, expressionless. "These are Sheikh Khalid's orders. Any disobedience will result in more severe consequences." Fatima, who had until then observed the scene in silence, smiled faintly, a smile that was not of scorn, but of deep and painful understanding. "Don't worry, Zara," she said, her voice soft but firm. "The sun is good for the skin, and a good dose of humility too." Zara felt her face burn, not just from the sun that was already beginning to punish her, but from shame and powerlessness. She looked at the parasol in her hand, then at Fatima's serene face, and at the impassive guard. There was no escape. With trembling hands, she opened the parasol and positioned it over Fatima's head, feeling the relentless heat of the sun on her own body. The weight of the parasol seemed unbearable, but the weight of the irony was even greater. The day had barely reached its peak, and Zara knew with terrifying certainty that Khalid's punishment was only just beginning. With trembling hands, Zara opened the parasol and positioned it over Fatima's head, feeling the relentless heat of the sun on her own body. The midday sun was a hammer pounding on her head. The plain fabric of the parasol, which was meant to protect Fatima, seemed to absorb and radiate even more heat onto Zara. Beads of sweat began to trickle down her forehead, irritating her eyes. Her arms, accustomed only to lifting champagne glasses and flipping through fashion magazines, began to ache almost immediately. She tried to adjust her posture, but every movement felt like a Herculean effort. Fatima, under the perfect shade, seemed oblivious to Zara's torment. She sipped her juice slowly, turning the pages of her book with an air of having not a single worry in the world. Every now and then, she would lift her gaze to the blue sky, a discreet smile on her lips, as if savoring every ray of sun that, ironically, Zara was blocking for her. "Is that good, Zara?" Fatima asked, her voice soft, almost a whisper, but which to Zara sounded like thunder. Make sure the shade is covering well. I don't want the sun to spoil my reading." Zara didn't respond. Fury bubbled within her, mixed with a humiliation so profound it made her want to scream. How could she, Zara, the Sheik's wife, the queen of this mansion, be there, serving the woman she had so despised? The smell of Fatima's sunscreen, the aroma of her mint tea, everything seemed to mock her. The minutes dragged on like hours. Zara's arm began to tremble uncontrollably. The parasol seemed to weigh a ton. She felt the heat penetrate her skin, slowly burning her. Her feet ached inside the delicate shoes that weren't made for standing so long. She looked at the guard, who stood at a respectful distance, but with his eyes fixed on her. There was no clemency in his gaze. "I need water," Zara managed to murmur, her voice hoarse. The guard merely shook his head. "No communication is allowed, Mrs. Zara. Only your instructions for Mrs. Fatima." Punch to the gut. No communication, the same rule, the same treatment. Zara felt a knot in her throat. She was trapped in her own game, and Khalid was the master of the rules. Fatima, hearing the interaction, lowered her book and looked at Zara. "Are you thirsty, dear? It's important to stay hydrated under the sun, but don't worry, I'm fine here in the shade." There was a hint of something in Fatima's voice. Not malice, but a calm, almost pitying observation that made Zara feel even smaller. Zara gritted her teeth. She couldn't give in. She couldn't show weakness, but her body was betraying her. Her head began to throb. Sweat streamed in rivulets, wetting her hair and clinging to her clothes. She smelled her own body, something she had never experienced before, always impeccable, always perfumed. The image of Fatima just a few days ago, huddled under the sun, holding the parasol for her, danced in her mind. That scornful smile she had displayed, the cruel words she had uttered, everything came back now, amplified, painful. Khalid wasn't just punishing her. He was forcing her to relive every moment of her own cruelty. "I can't do this anymore," she thought, desperate. Her muscles were in spasm. The parasol swayed dangerously. Fatima raised an eyebrow. "Is everything all right, Zara? The shade is a little crooked." Fatima's voice was a whip. Zara took a deep breath, trying to find some strength. She wouldn't give Fatima the satisfaction of seeing her collapse. She adjusted the parasol with a monumental effort, her arms visibly trembling. The afternoon hours stretched into a torturous eternity. The sun began to descend slowly, but its heat persisted, seeming even more oppressive as Zara's fatigue increased. She felt her skin burning, her throat dry, her head heavy. Rage had given way to a silent despair, an exhaustion that consumed every fiber of her being. She was a statue of suffering, a shadow of her former glory, trapped in a cycle of punishment that seemed endless. Sheikh Khalid wasn't just teaching a lesson, he was breaking Zara, piece by piece, under the same sun she had used to break his own mother. Zara didn't respond. No communication, the same rule, the same treatment. Zara gritted her teeth. She couldn't give in. "Is everything all right, Zara? The shade is a little crooked." Fatima's voice was a whip as the sun began to dip to the west, casting longer shadows over the garden. The guard finally approached. "Mrs. Fatima's afternoon has ended," he announced, his voice as monotonous as before. "Mrs. Zara may return to her room." Zara released the parasol, which fell to the ground with a dull thud and staggered. Her knees buckled, and she would have fallen had she not leaned against a nearby tree. Her entire body trembled. Fatima, without a word, rose gracefully from her chair and walked into the mansion, leaving Zara behind, gasping and humiliated. The guard offered no help. He merely watched Zara with the same impassiveness. "Dinner will be served in your room, Mrs. Zara, and tomorrow the day's instructions will be given in the morning." Zara barely managed to nod. Each step back to the mansion was an agony. The irony of the no communication rule and the mirrored treatment was a poison that corroded her soul. She knew this day was just the prelude. Khalid was only beginning to dismantle her life, her dignity, her very identity, brick by brick. And the terror of not knowing what would come next was almost as unbearable as the sun that still burned on her skin. Twilight painted the sky in shades of orange and purple as Zara, staggering, finally managed to drag herself into the mansion. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest. The skin on her arms and neck throbbed from the sunburn, and her feet, swollen and aching, barely supported her. The mansion's luxury, once her sanctuary, now seemed to mock her. The Persian carpets, the crystal chandeliers, the valuable artworks. Everything was a vivid reminder of what she was losing, of what Khalid was systematically taking from her. She climbed the stairs with difficulty, clinging to the cold marble banister. The guard followed her at a discreet distance, a constant shadow, a reminder of her imprisonment. Upon reaching her room, the door opened to reveal a space that was once her refuge of opulence. Now it felt like a tomb. The curtains were drawn, plunging the room into a melancholic gloom. On a small table, there was a silver tray. Zara approached, curiosity mingled with hunger. The tray contained a simple dish of rice and lentils, a piece of bread, and a glass of water. Nothing of the feast she was accustomed to enjoying. It was the servant's food, the most basic meal the mansion could offer. The humiliation was a bitter taste in her mouth, stronger than the hunger. She picked up the glass of water and drank it in one gulp, feeling her throat scratch. The fresh water was a momentary relief for the dryness that tormented her. She sat on the edge of the bed, too exhausted to worry about etiquette. The rice and lentils, though simple, were nutritious. She ate mechanically, each mouthful an act of survival, not pleasure. Zara's mind was in a whirlwind. Rage still bubbled, but it was now mingled with a growing fear. He was determined to make her pay for every tear, every humiliation Fatima had suffered. After eating, Zara dragged herself to the bathroom. The image of her face in the mirror shocked her. Her eyes were bloodshot, her skin reddened and marked by the sun, her hair tangled and damp with sweat. She looked like a stranger, a disfigured version of the impeccable woman she had always been. The cold water from the shower was a shock, but also a relief for her sunburned skin. She washed away the sweat and grime of the day, but the feeling of impurity, of degradation, remained. Upon leaving the shower, she put on a simple nightgown she found in the closet. Her designer clothes, her jewels, were no longer there. Everything had been removed, replaced by a simplicity she despised. She lay on the soft bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Zara's mind revisited every moment of the day, every word from Fatima, every tremor in her arms. She tried to hate Fatima, to blame Khalid, but an insistent voice in her head whispered, "You deserved this." The terror of tomorrow was a dark cloud hanging over her. What did Khalid plan next? What else would he take from her? The mansion, her status, her money, her freedom. Each day she felt she was losing a piece of herself. She tossed and turned in bed, trying to find a comfortable position, but physical pain and mental anguish were constant companions. The next morning, the sun had barely risen when a soft knock on the door woke her. It was the guard. "Mrs. Zara, your instructions for the day." Zara sat up in bed, her heart pounding. She felt weak but tried to gather some dignity. "Enter." The guard entered, holding a small tray. On it, there was a glass of water and a small bowl of porridge. "Your breakfast, Mrs. Zara, and today's instructions are as follows. Mrs. Fatima wishes for the garden to be tended. The flowers need to be watered, the weeds removed, and the flower beds tidied. Mrs. Zara will be responsible for this task throughout the day. There is no time limit. Only when the work is satisfactory to Mrs. Fatima may Mrs. Zara rest." The air seemed to thin in the room. Gardener. She, Zara, the woman who barely knew the difference between a rose and a carnation, would be a gardener. The humiliation was a physical blow. Her eyes widened in disbelief, but the guard remained unshakable. "And remember, Mrs. Zara," the guard continued, his voice monotonous, "no communication is allowed except for Mrs. Fatima, should she need anything." Zara said nothing. She merely looked at the porridge, at the water, and then at the guard. Sheik Khalid wasn't just breaking her, he was transforming her into something she never imagined being. And worst of all, she knew he was only just beginning. The garden, with its vast expanses and intricate flower beds, seemed like an insurmountable mountain. The sun, which would soon be high in the sky, promised another day of torment. Zara's nightmare was only just beginning to unfold, revealing new layers of punishment with each dawn. The guard finished his instructions, leaving Zara alone with her meager breakfast and the overwhelming weight of her new reality. Gardener. The title echoed in her mind like a cruel joke. She, Zara, whose hands were adorned with diamond rings, whose nails were always impeccably manicured, would now be a servant of the earth. The idea was so absurd, it almost made her laugh, but the laughter turned into a dry sob. She ate the tasteless porridge, feeling each spoonful go down like sand. The water was her only comfort. Upon finishing, she rose with a heavy sigh. Her muscles still protested from the previous day, and the prospect of more physical labor under the sun was daunting. She put on the simple clothes that had been left for her, a loose, drab cotton outfit, entirely different from her silk and linen dresses. As she descended to the garden, the green vastness opened before her, seeming even larger and more intimidating than before. Gardening tools, spades, rakes, thick gloves, were laid out on a small wooden table. Zara looked at them with repulsion. She had never touched anything so rudimentary. With a sigh of resignation, she put on the gloves, feeling the roughness of the fabric against her delicate skin. She picked up a spade and headed to the nearest flower bed, where some stubborn weeds mingled with the roses. She knelt, feeling the dampness of the earth through the fabric of her trousers. The earth, once something she only saw from afar, was now under her nails, on her clothes. The smell of wet earth and plants, which she once found pleasant in a well-kept garden, now seemed dirty, primitive. Her first movements were clumsy. She tried to pull out a weed, but the root was deep and stubborn. Her fingers, accustomed to holding champagne glasses and gold pens, were useless for the task. She pulled harder, and the weed finally gave way, but a piece of earth flew up, dirtying her face. Zara felt a wave of fury. Tears of frustration and humiliation began to well up in her eyes. Hours dragged on. The sun climbed in the sky, relentless as the day before. Zara felt sweat trickle down her forehead, mixing with the dirt. Her back ached, her knees were sore from kneeling so much, and her hands, even with the gloves, began to feel the roughness of the work. She looked at the garden, which seemed not to diminish in size, and at the little progress she had made. For every weed pulled, there seemed to be 10 new ones sprouting. At one point, Fatima appeared, walking calmly through the garden. She was dressed in a light, elegant kaftan, a wide-brimmed sun hat shielding her face. She didn't carry a book today, she merely observed. Her eyes, once filled with pain and submission, now carried an almost unsettling serenity. She stopped at a distance, watching Zara struggle with a daisy flower bed. "The daisies need room to breathe, Zara," Fatima said, her voice soft but clear, imbued with an authority Zara had never heard before. "The weeds are suffocating them, and be careful not to damage the flower roots." Zara gritted her teeth. Fatima's voice was a constant reminder of her new position. She wanted to scream, wanted to tell Fatima to do the work herself, but the no communication rule muzzled her. She merely nodded stiffly, trying to appear as if she was paying attention, while inwardly seething with resentment. Fatima continued her stroll, stopping at other points in the garden, examining Zara's work with a critical eye. She didn't smile, didn't mock. She merely observed, and occasionally offered a succinct instruction, always with the same calm, authoritative tone. "This flower bed needs to be turned over more deeply, Zara. The soil is too compacted." Or, "The rose bushes need pruning. Remove the dry branches and withered flowers." Each instruction was a stab at Zara's dignity. She, who once gave orders to a legion of servants, now received orders from Fatima, the woman she had treated like dirt. Khalid wasn't just punishing her. He was reversing their roles in such a complete way that it was almost unbearable. Hunger and thirst began to manifest again. Zara felt her mouth dry and her stomach rumbling. She looked at the guard, who stood at his usual post, motionless and expressionless. There was no sign of water or food. Khalid's punishment was relentless, encompassing all her basic needs. The sun began to dip to the west, but Fatima gave no sign that the work was finished. Zara was exhausted, her clothes dirty and torn in places, her hands throbbing. She looked at Fatima, who sat on a garden bench, reading a book, as if there was nothing wrong in the world. "Mrs. Fatima," Zara managed to murmur, her voice hoarse from effort and dehydration. "The garden. Is it satisfactory?" Fatima lowered her book and looked at Zara, her eyes assessing the work. She got up and walked slowly to the flower bed where Zara was. She ran her hand over some leaves, pulled out a small weed Zara had missed. "Not yet, Zara," Fatima said with a slight shake of her head. "There's much more to be done. The ferns need to be replanted, and the fountain is dirty. But you can rest for today. Tomorrow we will continue." Zara felt a pang of despair. Tomorrow? She could barely move today. She looked at the guard, who approached. "Mrs. Zara may return to her room. Dinner will be served as usual." Without waiting for Zara, Fatima turned and walked into the mansion, leaving Zara behind, kneeling in the dirt, broken and humiliated. Each day, Khalid tightened the noose, and Zara felt she was drowning in her own misery. The terror of what would come next was a constant shadow, darker than any twilight. She was a prisoner in her own home, and freedom seemed a distant, unattainable dream. The sun had barely begun to paint the east when a soft knock on Zara's door roused her from a restless sleep. Her knees still burned from the cold kitchen floor, and her back felt as if it had been lashed by an invisible whip. He placed it on the bedside table and remained silent. "Mrs. Fatima wishes for the mansion's pantries to be cleaned. Every shelf, every corner, every stored item must be inspected and cleaned. There is no time limit." Cleaning the pantries, she, Zara, who always had a team of dozens of servants, would now be the cleaner of a place of mold, dust, and arduous labor, which she had rarely visited. Zara said nothing. She looked at the guard, then at her own hands, once adorned with diamond rings, now destined to scrub and scrape. Khalid was dismantling her piece by piece, transforming her into a shadow of her former self. As she descended to the pantries, darkness and the smell of mold enveloped her. It was a labyrinth of dark wooden shelves, stacked with ceramic pots, sacks of grains, spice boxes, and old utensils. Dust covered everything like a grey mantle, and cobwebs adorned the corners. The same buckets, mops, brushes, and cleaning products from the previous day awaited her, and the thick gardening gloves were the only protection for her hands. She picked up a bucket, filled it with water and a cleaning product, and headed to the first shelf, encrusted with dust and dry residues. The smell of mold mingled with the pungent aroma of the chemicals, making her stomach churn. Hours dragged on. She looked at the vastness of the pantries, which seemed not to diminish in size, and at the little progress she had made. She was dressed in a simple cotton outfit, practical. She merely observed. Fatima stopped at a distance, watching Zara struggle with a dusty shelf. "The upper shelves need more attention, Zara," Fatima said, her voice soft but clear, imbued with an authority Zara had never heard before. "There's a thick layer of dust there, And make sure the ceramic pots are cleaned inside too. I don't want dirt residues where food will be stored." Zara gritted her teeth. Fatima continued her inspection, running her hand over a shelf, examining Zara's work with a critical eye. "This corner is dirty, Zara. Use the brush to remove the cobweb." Or, "The sacks of grains need to be shaken and the floor swept before being put back." Each instruction was a stab at Zara's dignity. Zara was exhausted, her clothes dirty and dusty, her hands throbbing and sore, with some small abrasions. "The pantries, are they satisfactory?" Fatima got up and walked slowly to one of the shelves, running her finger over a small area, inspecting it. "The pantries are acceptable for today, Zara," Fatima said, with a slight shake of her head. "But we still have the ground floor corridors. Tomorrow we will continue with the corridors." "Tomorrow?" Without waiting for Zara, Fatima turned and walked out of the pantries, leaving Zara behind, kneeling on the dusty floor, broken and humiliated. Burned from the cold floor of the kitchen and pantries, and her back felt as if it had been lashed by an invisible whip. Mrs. Fatima wishes for the mansion's ground floor corridors to be cleaned. Every inch of the floor, walls, ornaments and furniture must be inspected and cleaned. There is no time limit. Cleaning the corridors. She, Zara, who always had a team of dozens of servants, would now be the cleaner of a labyrinth of polished marble, Persian carpets and antique furniture, which she once merely traversed with disdain. Zara said nothing. She looked at the guard, then at her own hands, once adorned with diamond rings, now destined to scrub and polish. As she descended to the corridors, the vastness of the task hit her like a punch. The corridors stretched for miles, adorned with expensive tapestries, ancient ceramic vases, and marble statues. The floor, which she had always considered impeccable, now seemed to demand a Herculean effort to meet Fatima's standard. The same buckets, mops, brushes, and cleaning products from the previous day awaited her. She picked up a bucket, filled it with water and a cleaning product, and headed to the first stretch of the corridor. She tried to scrub the marble, but the dirt seemed to adhere stubbornly. The smell of wax and chemicals mingled with the aroma of dust she raised, making her stomach churn. Hours dragged on. She looked at the expanse of the corridors, which seemed not to diminish in size, and at the little progress she had made. She merely observed. Fatima stopped at a distance, watching Zara struggle with a stubborn stain on the marble. "The corners need more attention, Zara," Fatima said, her voice soft but clear, imbued with an authority Zara had never heard before. "And make sure the baseboards are spotless. I don't want dirt residues where guests will step." Zara gritted her teeth. Fatima continued her inspection, running her hand over a tapestry, examining Zara's work with a critical eye. "This vase is dusty, Zara. Use the microfiber cloth to polish it." Or, "The statues need to be cleaned carefully. Don't leave any fingerprints." Each instruction was a stab at Zara's dignity. "The corridors, are they satisfactory?" Fatima got up and walked slowly to a freshly cleaned stretch, running her finger over a small area, inspecting it. "The corridors are acceptable for today, Zara," Fatima said, with a slight shake of her head. "You may rest now." Zara felt a pang of despair, but also a momentary relief. She could barely move. Without waiting for Zara, Fatima turned and walked out of the corridors, leaving Zara behind, kneeling on the marble floor, broken and humiliated. However, the night brought a change. After the insipid dinner, the guard returned to Zara's room. "Mrs. Zara must follow me," he said, his voice monotonous. Zara felt a chill. This was it, the end. She got up, her body protesting with every movement, and followed the guard through the mansion's dark corridors. They didn't go upstairs, nor to the exit. Instead, the guard led her to a part of the mansion she rarely visited, the back, where the servants' quarters were located. He stopped before a simple, unadorned wooden door. He opened it. The room was small, Spartan. A simple bed, a wooden dresser, and a small window overlooking the service courtyard. There was no luxury, no carpets, no artworks. It was a maid's room. Khalid was there, standing in the center of the room, imposing in his traditional robes. Fatima stood beside him, her eyes fixed on Zara without triumph, only a deep stillness. "Zara," Khalid said, his voice a chilling whisper that cut through the heavy air. "You lived in opulence, trampling on the dignity of others. Now you will live in humility, serving those you once despised." He gestured to the room. "This is your new home. Your belongings have been removed from your old room and stored. You will not have access to them. Your jewels, your expensive clothes, everything has been confiscated. You will eat what is served to the servants and wear the clothes you are given. Your days of luxury and power are over, forever." It wasn't exile, nor death. It was something worse. It was the death of her identity, the annihilation of everything she was. She would be a servant in her own home, under Fatima's watchful eye, forever. "Your life here will be one of service," Khalid continued, his eyes cold and unshakable. "Household chores will be your daily responsibility. Mrs. Fatima will supervise your work. There will be no more privileges, no power, no respect. You are now a servant in this house, and so it will be until the end of your days." Zara couldn't speak. Her mouth was dry, her body trembled. She looked at Fatima, who watched her with an expression Zara couldn't decipher. There was no hatred, no explicit vengeance, only the acceptance of a cold, relentless justice. Khalid took a step back. "The guard will bring you your new clothes in the morning. Your first task will be to clean the stables." The guard closed the door, leaving Zara alone in the small, dark room. She collapsed onto the bed, tears silently streaming down her dirty face. There was nowhere left to run, no one to appeal to. The inversion was complete. The queen had become the servant, and the mansion, which was once her kingdom, was now her eternal prison. Freedom was indeed a distant, unattainable dream, and the terror of what would come next was a constant shadow, darker than any twilight. It was the end.